thank you for the invitation to testify before the committee today. My colleague and I will split our opening remarks. The CCLA is encouraged to see progress on Bill C-20 and hopes to see the bill become law. C-20 improves the oversight structure of the RCMP and establishes independent oversight of the CBSA, which is long overdue. I will address 3 recommended amendments, which, as outlined in the Civil Society Joint Brief, speak to concerns shared by many organizations. First, Section 33 sub 1 and sub 2 and Section 36 sub 1 and sub 2 ought to be amended to permit complaints into a pattern of conduct which may concern multiple RCMP or CBSA employees. This would allow, where appropriate, a broader scale examination of misconduct which has shared causes or impacts. As you know, the House of Commons recently held an emergency debate about the need for action after a pattern of Indigenous persons killed by RCMP officers. In our view, this amendment would ensure that where misconduct constitutes a pattern, as it has in the recent deaths of Indigenous persons, the full scale of the issue can be examined under this complaint route. Second, we recommend that Section 44 sub 1c be amended to ensure that third parties with a substantial interest in the complaint, and with permission from the individual at whom the conduct was directed, can make representations. Third parties can provide important insight into the scale and nature of misconduct, whether the complaint itself concerns a single incident or a pattern. Third, we recommend amending Section 28 sub 1 and sub 2 to permit reviews of specified activities for the purpose of considering their impact on the public, and to include RCMP or CBSA practices as reviewable. This would ensure that concerns that are systemic in nature, but not traced directly back to non-compliance with a specific law or policy, can still be subject to appropriate scrutiny. I will now hand it over to my colleague.
My colleague has raised pressing concerns about gaps in accountability for law enforcement agencies in Canada, including that lethal force used against Indigenous, Black, and racialized people and those with mental health conditions highlight the necessity for greater accountability of federal law enforcement agencies. I will focus our remaining time on the critical need for oversight of the CBSA, the only federal agency with broad law enforcement powers that has no independent review and complaint mechanism. Given these broad enforcement and security powers of the CBSA and its interactions with such vulnerable and marginalized groups of individuals, namely migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, the majority of whom are racialized, this glaring absence of oversight raises alarming concerns around accountability. Civil society organizations like the CCLA have long called for an independent oversight, review, and complaints mechanism for the CBSA. The death of detainees held in CBSA custody, interrogation tactics of CBSA officers, and breaches of privacy rights by information sharing with external bodies demonstrates that this complete lack of oversight must be addressed. Since 2000, at least 18 asylum seekers and migrants have died in immigration detention in Canada. I want to share with you the story of one of those tragic deaths. Abdul Rahman Hassan was a refugee from Somalia who came to Canada in 1992. Mr. Hassan lived with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder, and after multiple encounters with law enforcement, he was placed in immigration detention. During this time, he was repeatedly subjected to prolonged segregation, in one instance spending 95 consecutive days in solitary confinement. Tragically, Mr. Hassan died on June 11, 2015, while in CBSA custody. It took 8 years to achieve some semblance of justice and accountability when a coroner's inquest into Mr. Hassan's death delivered its verdict and recommendations in February 2023. One of those 53 recommendations was to establish an independent oversight body for the CBSA so that what happens to Mr. Hassan would not happen again. The need for an oversight body for the CBSA is long overdue and urgent, and the time to act is now. We urge the honorable members of this committee to work together to ensure that measures are put into place for a truly effective, accountable, and independent oversight for federal law enforcement agencies. Thank you, and we look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you both.